Hello, we're live, relatively close to start time. Welcome to our live chat this evening. We're going to be talking about writing supporting characters, which should be a lot of fun. Say hey in the discussion section if you're here. We would love to chat with you. Favorite part of every Sunday. I think we're going to kick it off with just talking about maybe how we want to define supporting character for the purposes of this chat. I know definitions might vary from project to project. So how do you all want to define supporting character in this context?
I've been thinking about it like in terms of television, of like who you put up for like the supporting Emmy versus. It's like in like clear cut one POV character or books, it's pretty straightforward. But then like ensemble cast stuff gets tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Like who are the supporting characters in Six of Crows?
I'd say one thing is that like they're characters where you maybe don't necessarily see like the full character arc. Like you might see pieces of their character arc, but you maybe aren't seeing like the full thing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like realistically, because my inclination would just be like, well, the supporting characters are not the main characters. Realistically, I think it probably exists on somewhat of a spectrum where it's like, this person is very clearly the MC, like the POV character. This person is like main cast, like they get a lot of page time or screen time or whatever. And then it just kind of like trickles down into like, well, this person's here sometimes. This person was here once.
Background characters.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think of it as like,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like who, like what lens are we viewing the story through? Like in whichever, like if that's video game, TV, book, etc. So if we're not like viewing the story through their lens, I think of all the other characters as supporting characters, no matter like how much they're like on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Kind of what back to Kyra saying with the spectrum, I think like there's a difference between like a minor character and a supporting character. So I would say that like a supporting character is someone usually that you see more than once within a story.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard because it's like if I am writing a single POV romance, then the love interest is not the main character, but calling them a supporting character also feels like, no, they're more important than that. You know?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about it in terms of like the constraints of genre, because in horror, it's very common to kind of slip into other POVs, sometimes multiple times. But you can usually still pinpoint like, well, this is the person who's experiencing the horror. Like I just read The Spite House, and I want to say Nicole maybe recommended that one to me. I had a couple people around the same time be like, you should try reading The Spite House, and I really, really loved it. And that is one where you spend a lot of time in other characters' heads so that you can learn all of the context. But like that's what they're there for, is to contextualize things primarily.
Yeah, because I'm reading The Golden Spoon, which Nicole definitely recommended. And like all of the characters, like I'm a decent chunk through. I don't even technically really know what's happening. And like I'm getting different characters that could have different motivations for being shifty, and like different characters seeing horrific-y things. So like I'm also thinking about like Game of Thrones, the book, where sometimes you'll be in a POV character and someone who is a POV character elsewhere is acting as a supporting character in a different character's like main arc. So we're going to let it be whatever it needs to be for the purposes of this conversation.
And well, just also since Six of Crows has already been brought up, I think it would be easy to be like, well, the POV characters are but that's also one where like we get these weird dips in the first chapter to like the mustache guy is not the supporting character, but
He's
also
not.
the guy who appears once and dies. No, I would not consider him like a main cast. Weirdly enough, Wyland's POV is not in the first book.
Yeah.
But like he still feels like a main character, even though his POV doesn't actually show up until the second book. So yeah, it is messy to define.
I think
See,
there's an element of like how much that character is like helping drive the plot. I think that's an element of it too.
Because I'm rereading the second book right now, and Wyland still doesn't really feel like a main character to me because he doesn't do that much like plot driving. He is kind of
Oh, interesting. Because to
device.
me, like I'd say the opposite. Like even in the first book, he feels to me like a main character, even when he's not like a
Interesting.
POV character.
Fight.
I will. Kyra is the boss on these
The
decisions.
Six of Crows expert.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a comment from Morgan. Perfect timing as I took a break from writing a book using the 200-page plot from Leap Bardugo. I define supporting character as a character who is important but not seen in every chapter. Yeah, that's really interesting. So obviously, the definition can be really flexible for lots of people.
And like we've been saying, depending on genre. Because
For
to go back to Game of Thrones, if you define it that way, like no one's a main character because no one's in every chapter.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really interested. I haven't thought that much about how there's like ensemble casts, and then there's a couple people who are very obviously the main character, and ensemble casts really muddy those waters. Nicole said, I think supporting characters hit one or more of the archetypes, for example, the love interest or the mentor, or explore and expand some aspects of the theme.
It's interesting though, because I feel like there are books where the mentor feels like a supporting character rather than, I don't know. Yeah, like I didn't come into this chat thinking that defining supporting character would be that. But then I thought about it for 2 seconds. I'm like, no.
It's a metaphor for writing.
Yeah. No joke.
Hello, Andrew and Cool Gamer. Yeah, if you're joining us late, we're talking about supporting characters. Let us know any thoughts you have on supporting characters or questions you might want us to discuss regarding supporting characters. I was curious next up, how do you decide like how many supporting characters your story needs? Yeah, we'll start with that. I have a lot of follow-up questions, but we'll start with that one.
I like a really small, tight cast. So for me, if I'm going to add a character, I have to really be like, what are they doing for this story? Do I really need this character? And that's not like something I think is necessarily inherently the right way to do things. But for me, like, I really like to justify someone's existence on the page. So yeah, for me, I really try to be like, okay, what are they adding to the story? Would the story be okay if I took them out? Are they supporting the plot, as it were?
Yeah, I wrote a book that had a lot of characters in it, and it still has a lot of characters in it, but like I definitely had to cut down on the number of characters. So I had to kind of go through that process after I had written a draft and revised it of like, are you really needed? So I hadn't done that from like the get-go. I was just like, there's going to be this competition. Obviously, you need to have a lot of competitors. So I think it's something that like as I continue to draft and get better at like planning, I'm a bit better about, and I'm less likely to like name a character if they're only going to be in one scene. So I think it's just something that I am getting better at, but it's not something that I intentionally am like, okay, I need a love interest, I need this mentor, I need that. It's just more like, this is the character, here are some people around them, here's the story I'm trying to tell, and then of course you sprinkle in some as you go.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I'm really bad about adding a character for one scene, and then like I'll go back and I'm like, oh, okay, you're here now. So I've had to like go back and like combine characters, because I am a planter and character development is not one of the things I spend a lot of time on if they're not my main character. So there just tends to be a little bit of a side character soup.
Yeah. I feel like in my current work in progress, I had a very clear idea of which characters I wanted to be in it. And, you know, there were two very obvious, these are the main two characters. And then there were like 4 or 5 characters who it was like, you're all important to me and I need you to be there for a different reason. But then after I went back through in revisions, it was like, none of you are beefed up enough to warrant the amount of attention I've given you. And so it was like this weird inverse issue where it was like, I have to go through now and make sure that all of this is weighted correctly and that you're all developed enough and not just kind of
Well, and
appearing.
this is another one that feels like somewhat genre dependent. Like I'm writing like YA contemporaries, like I can get away with a pretty small cast most of the time. With like horror or like mystery, like horror, you maybe need some extra bodies to
Yeah, you need some people to work with.
Yeah.
mystery, like
struggle with that.
well, like in mystery, like you need your deflector characters and whatever. So yeah, it like totally makes sense that it's dependent on what you're writing.
Yeah, I was gonna jokingly say like it's just all vibes. That's how I decide. But like really, I do think a lot of it has to do with like the vibe and like the flavor of story you're trying to make. Because when you want that, like if you want like a big grand fantasy, you're gonna have to have a lot of characters for that sort of thing. If you want like like intimate contemporary romance, then you're gonna want a smaller cast for that. It really depends on like the feel you're going for.
And the age
Andrew
category.
So Andrew said, so we're talking about like main characters who are not the protagonists or antagonists or just like everyone who gets a name. And I've been trying to come up with like non-Harry Potter examples, but it's still just like such a go-to in my head of like even just thinking about the first book, which is a little middle grade, but the amount of characters who are like really well established in the world aren't necessarily driving the plot, just driving Harry's experience. There's tons, like, and it's kind of a big part of what made those books come alive.
I think
and that's always kind of what I strive for. It's just so hard to pull off.
I think it's like having characters really contribute to the world building in a way.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I was gonna say also like characters that are more than just a name. Like if they have a name and just like even just a tiny bit of personality to like help define them, that makes it feel more real. So I think I think like because if it's just like a name or just like your character's passing somebody on the street, then that's not really a supporting character. That's just like a background world building character, you know. But it's like once they start to have like a personality, I think it starts to become supporting.
They're an extra on the movie set.
Yeah.
Makes me think too about like the Pendragon series, which had like obviously you're always following Bobby and his ongoing romance, and he's got a couple friends who reappear, but up until you hit like the 8th book,
something like that.
he's kind of just meeting all new people, and then you start to hit the end, and it's like, oh my god, everyone's coming back.
That's pretty cool.
In a really cool way.
Also thinking a lot about Ted Lasso. It's just kind of everyone who isn't Ted Lasso is a supporting character in that world.
Yeah.
But also Ted Lasso
until the last
season.
And I would even argue that like Ted's not the only main character. Like I don't know that I would call Rebecca a supporting character. Like I feel like she's a main character.
Initially, she was kind of the antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So that show just evolved weird.
Yeah.
And Grizel said, I love characters. The more, the merrier. I always have to cut characters because most of them don't do anything or impact the plot. Oh, that was what I was thinking of talking about age categories. Something that I've struggled a lot with was the old school YA writing advice was like, well, if they don't have their own arc, even if you're not seeing it on page, then you shouldn't have them. And if they aren't like significantly contributing to everything your character's doing, then you shouldn't have them. And like, A, I don't think that's totally true in the YA sphere anymore either, but B, it's especially not true in the adult sphere. And it's been really hard to train my brain out of thinking that way. Where like if I want to dip into one person's POV just so I can show something spooky, I'm allowed to do that. I don't have to cut it just because it's like the main character isn't in the other room while it's happening.
I think there is a fine. There's like I can get what they're trying to avoid with that like really overly prescriptive advice. I'm thinking of like the Rebel Wilson movie, like Isn't It Romantic, where she like ends up in the rom-com and there's like the character who's her gay best friend. And at one point she's like, "What do you do when I'm not here?" And he's like, "Nothing." Like moped or like that to me is like, I think that advice kind of came out because we wanted to avoid characters like that were just like literally just there. Like I at least like to think that, you know, and I think it's different too if you have a purpose that is something like I want to see something spooky or whatever. But if you don't have something like that, I at least want to be like, okay, what does this person do when the main character isn't around? Do they do anything? If not, I want to like revisit that.
Yeah. For sure. I had another question and I've lost it. So let me check the comments.
One thing I think about like supporting characters in like terms of like not stories is when I play The Sims, because I give my townies and stuff like backstory and stuff. So like, you know, that's also kind of interesting to me.
For sure. I'm really curious, do you all, how much does like plotting versus revising a supporting character into themselves, where do you tend to do more of your supporting character work, or is it pretty equal?
I think it's revising for me, but it is for the main character as well. Like I have a general idea for the plot, and then I'm like, okay, you're the main character, and here's some of your friends or your enemies or whatever, and then like always in subsequent drafts is when they get more nuance, and it's like, oh, maybe they should have a goal outside of the protagonist's goal.
I feel like I've started doing it more up front than I used to. But again, part of it is for me, like, I'm really conscientious if I'm introducing a character, I want to kind of already know what I'm doing with them. Not that I don't still revise them into a more shapely form, but like I feel like I'm doing more work up front than I used to, certainly.
I've gotten really into the program Scapple, which is there's plenty of programs like this out there, but it's just like a idea webbing thing made by the people who made Scrivener. And I've been using that a lot lately for trying to figure out, because my last few projects have all had a lot of characters, like it's a big town or it's a big cast. Even if it's not like, oh, everyone's a supporting character. I found it really useful to just put in, okay, well, if this is my main character, how are they connected to all of these people? Even if it's like multiple people removed, how are they connected to each other? And just like putting in those dotted lines and stuff. And Griswold said, I always worry one scene in a different POV will be seen as head hopping, but I want to do it all the time. Same. Yeah. I've allowed myself one head hop as a treat in my current book. And if anyone tells me to remove it, I will say no. Just kidding. If everyone told me to remove it, I would. But we've got Morgan said we need to decide these things. You know, it's for some people it comes pretty naturally. I think there's parts of the process that always come naturally for some people and not others. This is not one that is super intuitive for me, and so it's definitely one that I have to consider a lot. I'm curious, what is your process once you've decided, or I guess, how do you decide that a supporting character needs to be demoted or removed altogether?
I think sometimes if they're like serving a really similar role to another character, like sometimes characters can kind of be combined. Like, do we really need both of you here? Which sometimes, like, just for like, once again, the vibes, you do want two characters that have like similar roles. But sometimes it's like, does the story need that, or do I just need one character doing this? So that's one reason that I sometimes will cut a character.
Yeah. Generally, if they can't easily be merged with another character, then it's very seriously considered. Like in most cases, that's probably the route I end up going. But not always.
If I'm revising and I forgot they existed, it's probably a good sign that I don't need them.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar to that, when I've gotten beta reader comments back, they're like, I don't really remember the difference between these two characters. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I find with Bez's example, like if I am like reading through the manuscript for revisions and I'm like, oh, I forgot I even put this person in here. They're only in here once or twice. Like it's like always like I have to stop and think like, does this person need to go or do they need to like be beefed up more? You know,
Right.
Because sometimes it's just that I forgot. Like, you know, I just like got caught up in other parts of the story and forgot like, no, I really wanted this like theme and this character was going to serve that theme and I forgot to put it in the rest of the book. So it's always kind of the question.
But they show up like twice and then show up again in the finale. You're like, I can't have you. You're important.
Just like dropping plot threads.
I had this book that I wrote where one of the main characters turns her landlord into a raven so that she doesn't have to pay rent. And like,
What a
You
mood.
know, she's on to something.
right? Anyways, so like they do this big travel quest storyline, and like I kept forgetting to put him in the scene. So like his name was Felix. So now whenever I write a character and I'm like, oh wait, no, can't pull a Felix. Like they have to return.
I like in Griswold's answer when I have to double check their name for the fourth time.
Yeah.
The worst is when they show up so
Yeah.
sporadically that you like accidentally give them a different name every time. You're like, oh wait, that was all the same person. I forgot the name. Was it Sophie or Sophia? I don't remember.
I'm reading Mastering Plot Twists by Jane Cleland. I think is her last name. I can't read the quote because I left the book at Emma's house. It's in my purse. I left it at Emma's house. But it was talking about kind of cases where you might have characters who they're kind of similar, but you need them both. And it was talking about the importance of analyzing kind of the little things that they do, how, you know, someone might make a joke and people will have dramatically different reactions to that joke. Like someone might not realize it's a joke. And even two people who are very similar, one might think it's really funny and one might think it's like, oh, I've heard that joke before, you know, and that's a very different response. And so then you can really dig into the minor differences to make them seem much more different. And I thought that was really interesting.
I think sometimes there are also like, I'm thinking especially of like humorous cases where it's like sometimes part of the humor is that there's two of them. So like I'm thinking of like Parks and Rec, and it's like Tom and Donna in a lot of ways are very similar characters. Like they don't serve super different plot, like, you know, they have a lot of the same things, but sometimes the fact that there's like just two of them on that nonsense, like if it was just Tom doing Treat Yourself, like that wouldn't be funny, but because they're both there like snapping like off each other, like that's what makes it funny.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I also think they're like an interesting example of two similar characters, and like Megan was saying, like finding those little details that make them different. Because like just like now that you've mentioned them, like thinking about them, I feel like Donna is kind of like she's like the more mature and like self-realized version, where she's like more confident in herself, and so you kind of get to see like the younger Tom who's like putting on this show of confidence, but you can tell he's kind of like insecure. Where like Donna's like, no,
Yeah.
I really am just like confident. in
Or like
myself.
Hitchcock and Scully would be another, I think, good one where it's like they're very, very similar, but the fact that there's two of them is funny.
Yes. That's, yeah. Mhm. Like what's
Doing
the
their
difference between
nonsense
the two of them?
together. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example.
It makes me think too now of when they throw Craig into the mix, who is on paper also just like them, but in all capital letters. But they're all like, they all feel so different.
Mhm.
Andrew said, I've learned to keep a list of my characters while I write so I don't drop anyone. I made the horrible mistake this time. I thought in my head, I'm just going to start, if I don't know someone's name, I'll put in brackets. And I'll just go through and find the brackets. And usually that works okay. But this book has had some pretty dramatic transformations. One of my like big supporting characters like has multiple POVs. Her name has changed 3 times. I've changed, background characters to the point that it's like, oh, well, there's the Hendersons and the Harrisons, and they're supposed to be the same person. And I should have written them down. It was a terrible mistake not to.
I always start drafting with like, okay, I have a list of characters. I'm going to keep adding to it, and by like midway through the book, I forget, and then I'll like add characters, and I'll like forget to write them down, and yeah.
Yeah.
I always have good intentions. Yeah.
Now my revisions are full of comments that's like, go back and name check Henderson's ? Is that the one I'm going with? I don't know. Do you have any tips for, you've decided you have this supporting character and you need them to not be there? How do you survive revisions extracting a supporting character?
Oh, that's the worst.
I feel like it's always hard because sometimes it's like HGTV and all of a sudden it's like, wait, that was a load-bearing wall.
That was a load-bearing mailman.
Supporting character. We need that support. Well, I think from just like a logistical standpoint, a starting point, if you've decided I'm going to take them out, is just figuring out where they all are and like all the threads that they're connected to.
Yeah. I say like figuring out every scene they're in and what they do in that scene. Like what like purpose are they serving in that scene, so that you can decide like, does another character need to serve that purpose, or can that just like come out altogether because it's not a part of the story anymore?
I think sometimes it's easy to add characters to solve. I don't even want to call them plot problems because they're just like logistical problems. Like you need someone to give the main character. You need the main character to acquire something and someone can give it to them, or, they have to, just like little things like that, just getting people where you need to go and just like feeling like, okay, I can figure out another way for my character to learn this or to acquire this or to have a reason to go across the street or whatever it is that you're trying to move them around. Because I feel like that's a lot of times where it's easiest to add characters you don't really need.
Yeah. It reminds me what you're saying, Leah. When I was in Pitch Wars a million years ago, there was quite a lot of big stuff I changed, and that included supporting characters. And I did go through and do like note card method, stick a Post-it note on every scene where that person is, leave a little note. And I should probably do that more again, because that was the most organized. I was going to say easy, but it's never easy. That was definitely the most orderly I've ever been able to do it. Yeah, supporting characters. We're cruising through at a faster pace than I was anticipating. So,
do we have favorite supporting characters?
Ooh.
Hmm.
I was thinking about that before the chat. I'm like, I bet that's going to be the first question we do. And then I promptly forgot like every supporting character I'd ever encountered.
I am pulling up my Goodreads right now.
The ones who make
Oh, yeah, I should
you
look at
like
these ones.
believe they could do a spin-off of like there is enough of this person left after the book to be like, I still need to know so much more about them.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think romance books kind of do that really well in that
Mhm.
regard because they're usually like, I want to write a romance book with this character as the main character, so they like really flesh them out.
Yeah, and those like kind of serious. It's fun to like go, ho, main character's best friend who
Yeah.
is
I
happens to
see
be
you
single.
there. Interesting. You seem like a mess.
I always love when you're like reading one and you can see it being set up. It's like, ah ha ha.
Mhm. And it's
it
such
just-
a tightrope to walk too between making them really lovable but not so powerful that you start to wonder, well, why are we doing this one?
Yeah, I'd rather read this person's story.
I have two that come to mind, but they're from TV shows and not books because I watch a lot of TV. The first one that I immediately thought of was Mr. Poe from Series of Unfortunate Events, the banker.
Mhm.
Loved him. Thought he was hilarious. And then also Rogelio from Jane the Virgin. So I've been rewatching that show, and he's a great supporting character.
That show had great supporting characters in general.
Yeah, it really did.
I love a good like recurring comedic character. Like one of mine that I thought of was like Doug Judy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
He's
God,
always
yes.
hilarious. Like he has a funny character, but he also like does really fun things for like Jake as a character. Like he's a really good
Mhm.
foil for Jake, and so
Yeah.
it's not just that he's funny, but like I feel like Jake has like some introspection every time he shows up.
Mhm.
I love their dynamic and just the general like. Clearly, this is Jake's best friend soulmate, and it's just it makes me a little sad for Charles every time because these two should be together all the time forever.
And he's the only one really who seems to make Jake question his career, which ends up being a huge decision for him later. Like,
Mhm.
I saw something once that was like Doug Judy is Jake if he like latched on to Ocean's 11 instead of Die Hard. Like, yep, that's what it is.
That makes sense.
yes.
Hilarious.
I love so many of the supporting characters in Abbott Elementary, but especially Melissa and Miss Barbara. Like, I love them, and Ava. I would die for Ava. I love her so much.
I read a book last year that I think about all the time. It's called My Sister the Serial Killer. And so her sister's probably a serial killer. And so she's obviously the supporting character, the sister is, and it was done really, really well. I thought it was balanced so perfectly. So I never felt like the sister should be the main character. Yeah, I loved it. Hi, Jessica. And Griswold said, I think Hudson from Aliens is my favorite supporting character. We have a question from Andrew. How do I keep from making a supporting character arc into a full subplot?
That's tricky. I think that's kind of where Ted Lasso got confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of feelings about that.
I think it's partly a question of like how, if you did add that subplot, like how would it serve the main plot?
Mm-hmm.
Would it like reflect on the themes of the main plot? Would it provide a foil to something? And if it's not actually like doing anything for the main plot, then you probably don't need to have it. That's like general advice for subplots, you know, if it's not like helping the main plot in any way. then it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. And if it's not, you can also just look at, like, maybe it could be there, but I don't need to see it all happening.
Mhm.
So which parts would I need to see to still move forward the things that are important to me for this novel?
Mhm.
No, I just want to talk about Ted Lasso.
I was also going to say, I think an author who like does or did supporting characters really well is Tolkien. Like the supporting characters in Lord of the Rings all very much feel like their own people, especially when you start getting to like some of the different like lands and kingdoms and races and stuff. That they all have like their own goals and things that they want, and it's like seeing how those goals intersect with like Frodo and Aragorn's goals.
Merry and Pippin is another where it's funny because there's two of them.
Yeah, it's funny because you can't tell them apart.
Even then, like there is like some slight personality difference between the two, but like it's funny because there's two of them.
And this is one of the things too that a lot of people might disagree with me, and that's fine. That's up to you. But I thought that the Rings of Power juggled those like desires really well. Whether or not the execution was perfect is a separate thing, but I did feel like they stayed very true to a lot of the like goals and everything with those supporting characters that they had.
I thought of another type of supporting character that I like, which is the like
Another show that has
the wholesome father figure. So like Uncle Iroh.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's a good character type for supporting characters.
My brain jumped too far and went to the hot father figure.
I know, just supporting. There's some overlap. It's not
it's not a circle. I know your internet's lagging a little bit, but I'm gonna give you a second. What were you gonna say, Des?
Oh, I was gonna say another show that has really good supporting characters is Bluey. All of Bluey's friends feel like their own characters, like in their own world. I mean, the fact that like most people, like I don't want to say most people because people probably aren't as obsessed with Bluey as I am, but I feel like a lot of people know like Bluey's friends' names and like things like that. Like I think Pat, Lucky's dad, is a good example of a great side character, and Wendy, another
I was going to say Wendy,
side character,
especially in season 3 because they like really started to flesh her out more. They made her like more like multi-dimensional instead of just like the stuck-up mom. She like got more dimension to her.
I feel like a lot of children's shows actually do ensemble cast pretty well.
Yeah. I had to tell my child this week that we don't behave like a muffin. I had to very firmly state that if we're going to imitate Muffin, we're going to stop watching Bluey.
I want to do what I want.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said to me at a loud pitch, and I had to be like, no. Yeah, like you were saying, Kyra, I do feel like a lot of kid lit and children's like shows and everything do a really, really good job of balancing all their supporting casts.
I watch a lot of kid media, so I agree with that. I was gonna say Coraline, which is my favorite movie, impeccable supporting characters.
Think about just basically going through my favorite things in my head of like who are the supporting characters and how do they add, but like Hill House and the Dudleys I think was really interesting.
Ooh, yeah.
I have so many thoughts. I just watched the Hill House with the director's commentary this week, and it was really interesting. He was talking about the Dudleys in particular and the decisions that they made with those characters because they're in the text, but not like they are in the film. Yeah, overall, if you are able to and you like The Haunting of Hill House, I would definitely recommend, because he talks at length about the decision process for what they did with all the characters, the decisions to make supporting characters more or less important, and just like storytelling in general. I felt like I learned so much.
That's cool. I haven't watched many like director commentaries for films or TV shows. Is that common that they talk through the characterization like that, or is that kind of unique?
I don't watch a ton of them these days. I think for this one, it was a little unique because they don't always have the director. A lot of times it's the cast, and they don't make writing decisions. But Mike, he directed every episode of the show, and he was like very involved in the writing process.
And it's a very character focused show too.
Yeah. With a source text that is nothing like the show. And so they definitely had to make a lot of very deliberate decisions with what they were doing there.
While I didn't always agree with them, I do like both in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, like at the end of every episode, they have like the little like directors like little segment, and it is always interesting like to hear, like they'll talk about like why they had the characters make certain decisions, or like in their mind what was going through the characters like head, and things like that. It was always like really like enlightening and interesting to be like, okay, so that's why this character did this, their reasoning behind it, and like whether or not that translated to the viewer, it was always
whether or not you agree with
what I got from that,
It was really interesting in The Last of Us too.
I was gonna say, like, I miss like when The Talking Dead would come on like right after the new episodes of The Walking Dead.
Yes.
Great one.
Same vibes, except it was mostly cast then too. But
something that just interesting consideration based on like director commentary and stuff, because I read the AMA from Brendan Hunt for Ted Lasso, and some people, I don't want to give anything away because it just came out, but there was a choice in kind of a closing montage. A lot of people were like, this wouldn't have happened. But Brendan Hunt, who plays Coach Beard, talked a bit about just different character dynamics and like real life dynamics with the friends you have in your life, and how some people are very much, okay, you're right there in each other's business. But there are people that you can be close with and not see for a few years, and then you see them again, and it's like you've never been apart. And finding ways to work in those different kinds of character dynamics, not just the best friend and like the mentor role, like having more dynamic interactions between characters, I think turns out really interesting. Of like, not everyone is going to be your character's soulmate, know everything about them and understand them fundamentally. So just finding ways to work those in is, I think, what makes for nice tension with supporting characters.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about when they met, like they didn't all meet on the same day. Some of them have different lengths of time they've known each other. And that can cause conflict too. We comment from N. Griswold, the director's commentary for Hill House is on Netflix. I got it on Blu-ray in a panic when I thought Netflix was going down. I was like, I can't live without my Hill House. What if I need to watch it? And Netflix has gone the way of the earth. So yeah, if you keep an eye online, like you can buy the Blu-ray, and it has extended cuts for 4 or 5 of the episodes.
ooh,
That I thought were really interesting to watch. It was like Mike Flanagan gets to show exactly as much as he wants to show. And that was cool because all of the scenes in it where you think, oh, he's holding on these in the tension longer than a traditional horror movie would, and not cutting to like a jump scare or something. He does it longer in his dream cut. But yeah.
I love director's cuts always. They're, in my opinion, most of the time they're better. So now I will be scouring the internet to try to find that.
Yeah, and it was cool. He talked a lot about, I wanted to include this conversation and I'm glad it's here, but we had to cut it for these reasons. And it's always like a very, because television, blah, blah, blah. And so that was interesting too. My favorite thing is that like opening monologue from the woman that Steve is going to go write a book about her.
Mhm.
She filmed it in one cut, and it's like a really long monologue, and she's so good.
Something I have just been kind of thinking about. It feels like you can do different things with supporting characters in visual media than you can do in books, just because you do have the visual cues. And I'm thinking that probably because I saw Across the Spider-Verse last night.
Was it
And I
good?
it was so good. I want to like watch it again and deconstruct like plot things, but it was like just so pretty. The animation is amazing, but I don't think it's a spoiler to say there were a lot of spider people in it. And part of the reason like you can do that is because like you do have these visual clues where it's like, oh, these, even if they're both like Spider-Man, like a fairly classic design, it's like they're in completely different animation styles, so you know they're separate. Whereas like I don't think you could do that, at least not in that way, in a non-visual medium.
Yeah. How do
If
you guys?
anyone was, oh,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. No, you go.
No, it was so unimportant, so I really don't need to say it.
Say it.
Okay, I was gonna say if anyone was wondering, the Haunting of Hill House extended Blu-ray cut is on Amazon for $30. I just bought it.
What?
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's $30. I'm buying it right now.
Yeah.
So if anyone else is curious, that's where you can find it.
You thought that wasn't important, Des.
Yes. Come on.
It didn't pertain to the chat. Like,
I care more about Hill House than almost anything in this world.
I haven't even watched it, and I don't care to, and I think that was important
oh gosh,
information.
I've seen it so many times.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, in the case of supporting characters where they don't have, dramatically different personalities, like how do you really make them stand out through your process? Like, how do you like to make them distinct from one another?
I think that even if supporting characters have like similar personalities, I like to think about like how would they process the same information. So like even if like they were like very similar people, like does their like upbringing and background change how they like perceive information or change how they perceive like different situations, and show that like on the page.
I think it's interesting if they like maybe like want different things or have different goals or care about different things even though they have similar personalities, or like is their relationship to the main character different. That's interesting, I think.
Yeah. I also like to do a pass for each character in my revisions. Any like supporting character who we regularly see, I'll usually do a pass where I just go through like, are they in this chapter? What are they doing? Make a quick note. Just to make sure on a broader scale that they aren't like, oh, they never show up in a room together, when that doesn't make any sense. And being able to take a look at, have their personalities morphed? Have they swapped them at any point? Does it seem like these two are maybe changing and adopting each other's motivations, and should that be fixed?
I think it would also be interesting to have at least one scene where each of those two characters is interacting with the main character separately, like away from the other, to see how that changes the dynamic.
For sure. And as always, as with any writing advice, I do think the best thing that you can possibly do is just give your book to someone you trust to tell you if you've succeeded or not. Because it is really, really easy to get in your own head about things, especially when you've been working with them for so long. Yeah, and I do think too, it's something that takes time. And even if you feel like you know them pretty well right from the beginning, it is something that you'll still develop more and more. through each draft. So we've been going for just about an hour. So I was thinking of kind of guiding us towards a little wrap up. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Any final tips for supporting characters that we've maybe not touched on yet? Oh, this is an interesting question. Do you think supporting characters need to change like the protagonist does as they move along their arc?
No.
I was gonna say I personally would give like a reason as to why that character doesn't change. Like, I mean, if they're important to the main character, if they're just like a stall vendor in a scene, like no, like my character's never gonna see that person again.
The cabbage man never changes.
But if they're like, I think of like foils a lot to like the main character. So if like your main character is changing a lot, having a supporting character that doesn't, to show like that juxtaposition is, you know, fine, and even, you know, a good literary device to use.
And I think you should probably have a mix too. Like, I think the problem comes if all of your supporting characters or most of your supporting characters like have no development or like don't change at all, have no arc. But if you have kind of a mix of the two, like some characters who are a little more static, some who are a little bit more dynamic and changing, then that works better.
I think maybe I'm just stuck on Last Airbender tonight, but like Uncle Iroh like doesn't, like, he's like just kind of a nice steady character pretty much the whole series. Like he doesn't super change, but like that is also a series that I think does a really good job giving arcs to some of the minor characters. So like Ty Lee and May both have like for being definitely supporting characters, like they have arcs, you know. I think that show does that really well.
I have not I have not watched more than like maybe 5 episodes of The Last Airbender, but I would assume like Uncle Iroh is an old man, so like there's maybe an implication that like his change in character development maybe like happened earlier in his life, you know. So it probably makes sense, I think. For
it's not an implication. It's good. Yeah. We
know. Like directly says it.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
We know the exact moment that changed him too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's because like he is this very specific, like, I don't know that mentor is exactly like the right. I mean, he is a mentor to Zuko. Anyway, but like the whole point of him is that he's like kind of this guide to the other characters. Like, so it makes sense that maybe he's ultimately like where his character arc is supposed to lead to. So, and I think like that's a good character type where it's like, yep, he's pretty much where he is. Super comedic supporting characters, I think, also don't necessarily need an arc. Like, yep, they've been up to their shenanigans. They're still on their shenanigans, and they will always be doing their shenanigans. I think most other types, it's good to try and have a arc, but I don't think, as a blanket statement, all characters need that arc. I think I agree with that.
We have a really good question from Andrew that I think will be our good wrap things up question. But have any of you written a supporting character you've loved? / I'm going to say, tell me about a supporting character you've written that you've loved. I can start while y'all think about it. In the first book that I queried, after returning to the querying trenches, after coming out of them briefly, I have this character. The main character was kind of this villain. She didn't see herself that way, but the rest of the world very much did. And there was this supporting character who was her best friend, who was very much the devil on her shoulder type of character. It's like her if she was at her worst and at her most impulsive. And so that was obviously why they got along, but I thought it was just such a fun foil. And it was such a fun thing to play with. Like, what situations could I put them in where this would cause a lot of problems? And like, I want to put them in another situation again someday because it was so fun.
I think I actually have a few side characters that I really like, but just since it's on my brain, a manuscript I'm currently revising, the main character has a best friend, and I was really conscientious of like, it is a rom-com, and I didn't want him to be the gay best friend from the Rebel Wilson movie. Like, from the start was like, I do not want him to just be like this, like, cardboard prop. So like, he does kind of, and it is like we were talking about earlier, like he does kind of have his own thing going on. He's got his own romantic troubles. We certainly don't see all of it because it's not his story, but like, you know, it's there, and he feels like a really full character to me. But I also just really like him because for the character that he is friends with, like they just have a really great rapport that I think is funny a lot. I think it's funny a lot of times, but also like they just really like support each other in a way that like, because they have fairly different personalities, like they just build each other up and have some really sweet moments together as well. So he's been really fun to write. Best friends.
In the book I'm creating, there's a character who might even be kind of classified more as like a minor character than a supporting character. But if I ever write book 2, she'll have a larger role. And she's just the type of character who is very clever and says and does what she wants, and she's always scheming and is like very unlike me. So it's a lot of fun to write side characters like that, I think, supporting characters who you don't have to carry the story through them. So it's fun to play around.
For sure. Anyone else? Anyone?
I read a short story like once, and there's a side character who was a drug dealer, but like your friendly neighborhood drug dealer. And that was really, really fun because he was constantly like, he was a very anxious person. So it was fun to write an anxious drug dealer.
Yeah, that seems like a less than ideal career for an anxious
not
person.
The career move.
The book I'm rewriting right now, I really like the best friend character in it, because like I think the book kind of like starts out, she just seems like she's just like the best friend, you know, but like as it goes on, like you find out like she's like very flawed and has like done some like things the main character doesn't know about that have really hurt the main character. Like she's like caused hurt for the main character, and so it's just, I don't know, I think it's really fun to write a supporting character who's like a good person but like has some pretty major flaws and has done some terrible things. It's just, she's a really interesting person to write and figure out her motivations.
Yeah. All right. So I think with that, we will wrap things up. I was just going through the comments one more time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. This was really fun to talk about supporting characters. We will be back next week with a chat that has not been scheduled yet, but we're going to schedule it soon.
I scheduled it.
It's a Yurden, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I knew that I've only done the one just because I knew.
Not even thinking. Yes, next week we'll be back with a nerd in. And yeah, so we'll be productive, get some writing done. Maybe I'll be done with revisions, ? And I can do fun stuff again. So yeah, we will see you all then. Hope you all have a lovely week and that everything goes the way you want it to. Bye.